Welcome to Sinister States.
There's a certain kind of silence that only exists in places that were never meant to be silent. It's not the peaceful hush of a forest at dawn or the gentle quiet of a library after hours. No, this silence is heavier, almost suffocating, as if the air itself is holding its breath, waiting for something to happen. That's the silence I first encountered when I stepped through the shattered glass doors of the Crestwood Galleria, an abandoned mall on the outskirts of a city that had long since forgotten it. I'd always been drawn to places like this, ruins of the recent past, spaces that once pulsed with life and now stood as hollow reminders of how quickly things can change. Maybe it was the thrill of trespassing or the promise of discovering something left behind, but I think, deep down, it was the stories. Every abandoned place has a story, and every story is a mirror, reflecting something about the people who once filled these halls, and about those of us who come after, searching for meaning in the dust. It was late October, the kind of evening when the sun sets early and the wind carries a chill that seeps into your bones. I'd been planning this exploration for weeks, poring over old blueprints and satellite images, reading urban explorer forums for tips and warnings. Crestwood had a reputation. Some said it was haunted, others claimed it was dangerous for more mundane reasons: collapsing ceilings, mold, the occasional desperate squatter. But the stories that stuck with me were the ones about the echoes. People said you could hear voices in the food court, laughter in the empty corridors, the distant hum of a crowd that no longer existed. I didn't believe in ghosts, not really. I believed in the power of suggestion, in the way our minds fill in the blanks when confronted with the unknown. But I also knew that fear is a kind of gravity, pulling us toward the things we least want to face. And so, armed with a flashlight, a camera, and a notebook, I crossed the threshold into the darkness, determined to document whatever I found. The first thing that struck me was the smell. It was a mix of mildew, stale air, and something metallic, like old blood or rust. The floor was littered with debris, broken tiles, scraps of paper, the occasional soda can from a more recent visitor. My footsteps echoed, unnaturally loud, bouncing off the high ceilings and empty storefronts. I paused, listening, half expecting to hear someone or something moving in the shadows. But there was only that heavy silence, pressing in from all sides, that I made my way down the main corridor, passing stores whose names were barely visible beneath layers of grime. There was a shoe store, its display racks still holding a few battered sneakers. A jewelry kiosk, the glass cases smashed and empty. A toy store, its windows painted with faded cartoon characters that seemed to watch me as I passed. Every so often, I'd catch a glimpse of my own reflection in a cracked mirror or a pane of glass, and for a split second, I'd mistake it for someone else, a trick of the light, or maybe a warning. I stopped at the food court, drawn by the memory of childhood afternoons spent in places just like this. The tables were overturned, chairs scattered, as if the last customers had left in a hurry. The smell here was worse, tinged with rot. I shone my flashlight over the counters: Pizza Palace, Walk Express, Burger Barn. The signs were still there, but the food was long gone, replaced by a thick layer of dust and the occasional rat droppings. I took a few photos, trying to capture the way the light played across the surfaces, the way the shadows seemed to move when I wasn't looking directly at them. It was then that I heard it, a faint sound, like footsteps, coming from somewhere deeper in the mall. I froze, heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But curiosity is a powerful thing, and fear, once acknowledged, can become a kind of fuel. I told myself it was probably just another explorer, or maybe an animal. Still, I moved more cautiously, keeping to the edges, my flashlight beam darting from side to side. The sound faded as I approached the old arcade. a place I'd read about in the forums. According to the stories, the machine still worked if you could find a way to turn on the power. I doubted that, but the idea was strangely comforting, a reminder that even in places like this, some things endure. The arcade was a mess, the floor sticky with decades-old soda, the machines covered in graffiti. I ran my hand over the controls of a battered racing game, half expecting it to spring to life. Instead, my fingers came away black with grime. I sat for a moment, letting my eyes adjust to the darkness. The silence here was different, almost expectant. I thought about the people who had once filled this space. Kids with pockets full of quarters, parents waiting impatiently, the constant din of electronic music and laughter. Now, there was only the distant drip of water and the occasional creak of settling metal. I pulled out my notebook and began to write, trying to capture the feeling of the place. But the words felt inadequate, too small for the weight of the silence. I closed the notebook and stood, suddenly aware of how alone I was. The air felt colder, and I shivered, telling myself it was just the draft. As I made my way back toward the main corridor, I noticed something odd, a faint glow coming from one of the side hallways. I hesitated, every rational part of me screaming that this was a bad idea. But the part of me that had come here in the first place, the part that needed to know, pushed me forward. The hallway was lined with empty storefronts, their windows covered in grime. The light was coming from beneath a door at the far end, flickering like candlelight. I approached slowly, my footsteps muffled by the thick layer of dust. The door was slightly ajar, and as I pushed it open, I was hit by a wave of warm, stale air. Inside, the room was filled with candles, dozens of them, arranged in a rough circle on the floor. In the center sat a pile of objects, a child's shoe, a broken watch, a handful of coins, a faded photograph. The walls were covered in writing, scrawled in what looked like charcoal or ash. I couldn't make out the words, but the shapes were unsettling, twisting and looping in ways that made my skin crawl. I took a step back, suddenly aware of how vulnerable I was. Whoever had done this could still be nearby. I listened, straining to hear anything over the pounding of my own heart. But there was only the soft hiss of the candles, the faint rustle of air through the broken vents. I snapped a few photos, my hands shaking. I wanted to leave, but something held me in place, a sense that I was trespassing not just on someone's ritual, but on something older, deeper. I thought about the stories I'd read, the warnings about echoes and voices. I wondered if this was what they meant, if the mall had become a kind of magnet for lost souls, drawn by the promise of being remembered. As I turned to leave, I caught sight of my reflection in a broken mirror. For a moment, I didn't recognize myself. My face was pale, eyes wide, mouth set in a grim line. I looked like someone who had seen a ghost, or maybe become one. I hurried back to the main corridor, my footsteps echoing louder now. The silence felt different, charged, as if the mall itself was watching me. I tried to shake off the feeling, telling myself it was just nerves, just the adrenaline. But as I reached the entrance, I realized I wasn't alone. A figure stood in the shadows, half hidden behind a pillar. I froze, every muscle tensed, ready to run. The figure didn't move, didn't speak. I raised my flashlight, the beam cutting through the darkness, but it only seemed to make the shadows deeper. "Hello," I called, my voice barely more than a whisper. No response. The figure remained still, unmoving. I took a step forward, then another, my heart hammering in my chest. As I drew closer, I realized it wasn't a person at all. It was a mannequin, dressed in the tattered remains of a store uniform. Someone had propped it up, its plastic face turned toward the entrance, as if to greet or warn anyone who dared to enter. I let out a shaky laugh, relief and embarrassment mingling in equal measure. But the feeling didn't last. As I turned to leave, I heard the footsteps again, closer this time. echoing through the empty halls that I didn't look back. I ran, stumbling over debris, my breath coming in ragged gasps. The exit seemed impossibly far, the darkness pressing in from all sides. When I finally burst through the doors and into the cold night air, I collapsed on the pavement, heart racing, hands shaking. For a long moment, I just sat there, staring at the empty parking lot, the broken windows, the dark silhouette of the mall against the night sky. I told myself I'd imagined it, that the footsteps were just the sound of my own fear, amplified by the silence. But as I looked back at the entrance, I saw something that made my blood run cold. A single candle, flickering in the darkness, just inside the door that I left Crestwood Galleria that night with more questions than answers. I told myself I wouldn't go back, that some stories are better left unfinished. But the truth is, the mall stayed with me. In the days and weeks that followed, I found myself dreaming of empty corridors, of voices in the dark, of footsteps that never quite caught up to me. And sometimes, late at night, when the world is quiet and the shadows grow long, I hear that silence again, the silence that waits, heavy and expectant, in places that were never meant to be silent. The days after my first visit to Crestwood Galleria were marked by a strange restlessness. I found myself replaying every moment, every sound, every shadow, as if searching for a clue I'd missed. The world outside the mall felt thinner somehow, less substantial, as if I'd left a part of myself behind in those empty corridors. I tried to distract myself with work, with friends, with the comforting routines of daily life. But the memory of that silence, that oppressive hush, clung to me like a second skin that I started researching the mall's history in earnest, digging through old newspaper archives, city records, and online forums. Crestwood had opened in the late 1970s, a monument to suburban prosperity, its grand opening attended by local celebrities and politicians. For years, it had been the heart of the community, a place where families shopped, teenagers loitered, and holiday decorations transformed the atrium into a winter wonderland. But by the early 2000s, the cracks had begun to show. Stores closed, foot traffic dwindled, and rumors of crime and mismanagement spread. The final blow came in 2012, when a fire in the food court forced the last remaining tenants to leave. The building was condemned, and the city quietly erased it from its list of priorities. But the stories didn't stop. If anything, they grew more persistent, more insistent. People claimed to see lights in the windows at night, to hear music playing when the wind was right. Some said the mall was cursed, built on land that had once been a burial ground. Others whispered about disappearances, teenagers who'd gone exploring and never come back, security guards who quit after a single shift, their faces pale and eyes haunted. I dismissed most of it as urban legend, the kind of stories that grow in the cracks of abandoned places. But there was one account that caught my attention, a post on an old message board, written by someone who claimed to have worked at Crestwood in its final days. The post was rambling, disjointed, but one detail stood out. The writer described finding strange symbols scrawled on the walls of the service corridors, symbols that matched the ones I'd seen in the candlelit room that I reached out to the poster, not expecting a reply. To my surprise, I received an email a few days later. The message was brief, almost frantic. Don't go back. Some places remember. Some places don't let go. There was no signature, no way to trace the sender. I stared at the screen for a long time, the words echoing in my mind. But curiosity is a stubborn thing. The more I tried to ignore it, the stronger it became. I found myself drawn back to the mall, not out of bravado or thrill-seeking, but out of a need to understand. I needed to know what I'd seen, what I'd felt. I needed to know if the stories were true. So, a week after my first visit, I returned to Crestwood. This time, I came prepared. I brought extra batteries, a backup flashlight, a portable recorder, and a friend, Sam, a fellow explorer who'd spent years documenting abandoned places. Sam was skeptical of the supernatural, but he respected the power of a good story. He agreed to come along, partly out of curiosity, partly to keep me from doing something reckless. We arrived just after sunset, parking a few blocks away to avoid drawing attention. The air was colder than before, the sky a deep, bruised purple. As we approached the mall, I felt a familiar tension in my chest, a mix of excitement and dread. The building loomed ahead, its windows dark, its facade scarred by graffiti and neglect. "Ready?" Sam asked, his voice low. I nodded, trying to steady my breathing. "Let's do this." We slipped through a gap in the fence, our footsteps muffled by the overgrown grass. The main entrance was still open, the glass doors hanging crooked on their hinges. Inside, the air was thick with dust and the faint, lingering scent of smoke. Our flashlights cut through the darkness, illuminating the debris-strewn floor, the peeling paint, the empty storefronts. For a while, we moved in silence, our footsteps echoing in the vast, empty space. Sam snapped photos, his camera's flash briefly illuminating the shadows. I recorded audio, hoping to capture the ambient sounds, the creak of metal, the distant drip of water, the occasional scurry of a rat. We made our way to the food court, where the fire had started. The damage was still visible, charred beams, blackened tiles, a gaping hole in the ceiling where the flames had eaten through. Sam examined the burn patterns, speculating about the cause. I wandered to the edge of the court, drawn to the spot where I'd heard the footsteps on my last visit. "Anything," Sam called. "Just memories," I replied, though even as I said it, I wasn't sure it was true. That we continued deeper into the mall, following the main corridor past the arcade, the toy store, the jewelry kiosk. The silence was different this time, less oppressive, more watchful. I felt as if we were being observed, not by a person, but by the building itself. We reached the hallway where I'd found the candlelit room. The door was closed now, the light gone. I hesitated, then pushed it open. The candles were gone, the objects in the center scattered. The writing on the walls was still there, though faded and smudged. Sam examined the symbols, snapping photos, muttering about cults and urban legends. "Looks like someone's been here since your last visit," he said. "Yeah," I replied, my voice barely above a whisper. "But why?" Sam shrugged. "People do weird things in places like this. Maybe it's just a prank. Or maybe someone's trying to keep the story alive." We left the room, the sense of unease growing with every step. As we made our way back to the main corridor, we heard a sound, a low, rhythmic thumping, coming from somewhere above us. We froze, exchanging nervous glances. "Probably just the wind," Sam said. Though he didn't sound convinced, we followed the sound, climbing a set of stairs to the second floor. The upper level was even more decayed than the first, the floors sagging in places, the ceiling stained with water damage. The thumping grew louder as we approached the old department store at the far end of the mall. The store was a cavernous space, its shelves empty, its mannequins toppled and broken. The sound was coming from the back, near the loading dock. We moved cautiously, our flashlights sweeping over the debris. As we rounded a corner, we saw the source, a metal door, swinging back and forth in the wind, banging against the frame. Relief washed over me, mingled with embarrassment. I laughed, the sound echoing in the empty space. "See?" Sam said, grinning. "Nothing to worry about." But as we turned to leave, I caught sight of something in the corner, a shape, half hidden in the shadows. I raised my flashlight, the beam illuminating a pile of old clothes, a sleeping bag, a few empty cans. Someone had been living here, recently. Sam frowned, examining the makeshift camp. "Looks like we're not alone after all." We searched the area, but there was no sign of the occupant. The air felt colder, the silence heavier. I couldn't shake the feeling that we were being watched. "Let's get out of here," I said, my voice tight as we made our way back to the main corridor, moving quickly, our nerves on edge. As we passed the arcade, I heard a faint sound, a whisper, barely audible, like someone calling my name. I stopped, heart pounding, straining to listen. "Did you hear that?" I asked. Sam shook his head. "Hear what?" I hesitated, unsure. Maybe it was just my imagination, the product of too many stories and too little sleep. But as we reached the entrance, I glanced back and saw a figure standing at the far end of the corridor, a child, or the shadow of one, watching us with empty eyes. I blinked, and the figure was gone as we left the mall in silence, the night air biting at our skin. As we walked back to the car, Sam tried to lighten the mood, joking about haunted malls and ghost hunters. But I barely heard him. My mind was elsewhere, replaying the image of that shadowy figure, the whisper in the dark. That night, I dreamed of Crestwood. I wandered its empty halls, searching for something I couldn't name. The silence was absolute, broken only by the sound of footsteps, my own, or someone else's, I couldn't tell. I woke in a cold sweat, the memory of the dream lingering like a bruise that I in the days that followed. I tried to put the experience behind me. I told myself it was just a trick of the light, a product of fear and suggestion. But the feeling of being watched, of being followed, persisted. I started seeing shadows in the corners of my vision, hearing faint whispers when I was alone. I told myself it was nothing, but deep down, I knew better. I returned to my research, determined to find answers. I scoured old news articles, looking for any mention of accidents, crimes, or unexplained events at Crestwood. I found stories of theft, vandalism, the occasional fight, but nothing that explained the sense of unease that clung to the place. Then, I stumbled across a series of police reports from the early 1990s. They described a string of disappearances, mostly teenagers, all last seen at the mall. The cases were never solved, the files eventually closed. But one detail caught my eye. In each case, the missing person was last seen near the service corridors, the same area where I'd found the candlelit room that I dug deeper, searching for any connection between the victims. They came from different backgrounds, different neighborhoods, but all shared a fascination with the unknown. Some were amateur ghost hunters, others were drawn to the mall's reputation for strangeness. All of them, it seemed, had been searching for something that I couldn't shake the feeling that I was following in their footsteps, retracing their path through the darkness. I wondered if they, too, had heard the whispers, seen the shadows, felt the weight of the silence. One night, unable to sleep, I listened to the audio recordings from our last visit. For the most part, the tape was filled with the sounds of our footsteps, our voices, the occasional creak or thump. But near the end, as we were leaving, I heard something else, a faint, childlike voice, whispering my name. I played the clip over and over, trying to convince myself it was just interference, a trick of the mind. But the more I listened, the more certain I became. The voice was real, and it was calling to me that I knew then that I couldn't let it go. I had to return to Crestwood, one last time, to confront whatever waited in the darkness. I had to know the truth, no matter the cost. The decision to return to Crestwood Galleria wasn't made lightly. I spent days wrestling with it, torn between the rational part of my mind that screamed for caution and the deeper, more primal urge to seek answers. I told myself it was about closure, about putting the past to rest, but the truth was more complicated. The mall had become a kind of obsession, a puzzle I couldn't stop trying to solve. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw those empty corridors, heard the echo of footsteps, felt the weight of unseen eyes watching from the shadows that I tried to talk myself out of it. I made lists of reasons not to go: danger, trespassing, the risk of running into someone who didn't want to be found. But each argument only made the pull stronger. I started having dreams, vivid and unsettling, in which I wandered the mall's endless halls, searching for something just out of reach. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of the childlike figure from before, standing at the end of a corridor, beckoning me forward. I'd wake up with my heart racing. The image burned into my mind and I reached out to Sam, hoping he'd talk some sense into me. Instead, he surprised me. "I get it," he said, after I'd explained everything. "Places like that, they get under your skin. But if you're going back, you're not going alone." I hesitated. "You don't have to. I want to," he interrupted. "Besides, I've got some new gear I've been wanting to test out. If there's something weird going on in that mall, maybe we can finally catch it on camera." We made our plans carefully. This time, we'd go in the early morning, just before dawn, when the world was at its quietest and least forgiving. We packed extra lights, a thermal camera, audio recorders, and walkie-talkies. I brought my notebook, though I wasn't sure what I hoped to write. Maybe I just needed something to hold on to, a way to anchor myself in reality. The night before we left, I barely slept. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft murmur of voices drifting up from the street. Everything felt fragile, as if the world could shatter at any moment. I wondered if I was making a mistake, if I was chasing something that didn't want to be found. But as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I felt a strange sense of calm. The decision was made. There was no turning back. That we met in the parking lot just before 5, the sky still dark, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Sam looked tired but determined, his backpack slung over one shoulder, camera gear in hand. "Ready?" he asked, and I nodded, forcing a smile. "Let's finish this." We made our way to the mall in silence, the only sound the crunch of gravel beneath our boots. The building loomed ahead, more imposing in the half-light, its windows like empty eyes staring out at the world. We slipped through the gap in the fence, our breath visible in the cold air. Inside, the mall was colder than I remembered, the silence even more profound. Our footsteps echoed, each sound magnified by the emptiness. We moved quickly, retracing our steps from previous visits, the food court, the arcade, the candlelit room. Everything was as we'd left it, though the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. Sam set up his camera in the main corridor, adjusting the tripod and checking the battery. "If anything moves, we'll catch it," he said. His voice steadied and I nodded, though I wasn't sure I believed him. Some things, I thought, don't want to be seen. We split up, agreeing to check in every 10 minutes over the walkie-talkies. I headed toward the service corridors, drawn by the memory of the symbols on the walls. The air grew colder as I moved deeper into the building, the darkness pressing in from all sides. My flashlight flickered, the beam dancing over peeling paint and broken tiles that I found the room easily, the door still slightly ajar. Inside, the writing on the walls was clearer in the early morning light. I traced the symbols with my fingers, trying to make sense of them. They seemed to shift and change under my touch, the lines twisting into new shapes. I felt a sudden wave of dizziness, as if the room were spinning around me. That I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath. When I opened them again, the symbols were as they'd been before, strange, unsettling, but static. I pulled out my notebook and began to sketch them, hoping that seeing them on paper would help me understand that as I worked. I heard a faint sound, a whisper, so soft I almost missed it. I froze, listening. I started having dreams, vivid and unsettling, in which I wandered the mall's endless halls, searching for something just out of reach. Sometimes I'd catch a glimpse of the childlike figure from before, standing at the end of a corridor, beckoning me forward. I'd wake up with my heart racing. The image burned into my mind and I reached out to Sam, hoping he'd talk some sense into me. Instead, he surprised me. "I get it," he said, after I'd explained everything. Places like that, they get under your skin. But if you're going back, you're not going alone. I hesitated. You don't have to. I want to, he interrupted. Besides, I've got some new gear I've been wanting to test out. If there's something weird going on in that mall, maybe we can finally catch it on camera. We made our plans carefully. This time, we'd go in the early morning, just before dawn, when the world was at its quietest and least forgiving. We packed extra lights, a thermal camera, audio recorders, and walkie-talkies. I brought my notebook, though I wasn't sure what I hoped to write. Maybe I just needed something to hold on to, a way to anchor myself in reality. The night before we left, I barely slept. I lay awake, listening to the sounds of the city outside my window, the distant hum of traffic, the occasional bark of a dog, the soft murmur of voices drifting up from the street. Everything felt fragile, as if the world could shatter at any moment. I wondered if I was making a mistake, if I was chasing something that didn't want to be found. But as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, I felt a strange sense of calm. The decision was made. There was no turning back. That we met in the parking lot just before 5, the sky still dark, the air sharp with the promise of winter. Sam looked tired but determined, his backpack slung over one shoulder, camera gear in hand. Ready? He asked, and I nodded, forcing a smile. The whisper came again, closer this time, though I couldn't make out the words. My heart pounded in my chest, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I stayed, rooted to the spot, unable to look away from the symbols. The whisper grew louder, resolving into a child's voice, singing a lullaby I almost recognized. The melody was sweet, but the words were wrong, twisted into something dark and mournful. I felt a chill run down my spine, the hairs on my arms standing on end, and I fumbled for my walkie-talkie, my hands shaking. "Sam, are you there?" Static crackled, then his voice came through, tense. "Yeah, you okay?" I think I heard something. A voice. There was a pause. "Stay where you are. I'm coming." I waited, the seconds stretching into eternity. The singing continued, growing softer, more distant, as if the singer were moving away. I strained to listen, trying to catch the words, but they slipped through my mind like water. Sam arrived a few minutes later, his face pale. "I heard it too," he said quietly. "It was coming from the vents." We stood in silence, listening. The singing had stopped, replaced by the familiar hush of the mall. I felt a strange sense of loss, as if something precious had slipped away. "We should check the vents," Sam said, his voice barely above a whisper. We found a maintenance hatch nearby, the cover hanging loose. Sam shone his flashlight inside, illuminating a narrow tunnel filled with dust and debris. The air was thick with the smell of mold and something else, something sweet and rotten. "Do you think someone's in there?" I asked. Sam shook his head. "Not recently, but something's been here." We followed the tunnel as far as we could, crawling on hands and knees, our flashlights barely piercing the darkness. The walls were covered in more symbols, scratched into the metal, some fresh, others faded with age. The singing started again, echoing through the vents, the sound coming from everywhere and nowhere. We emerged in a small utility room, the air stifling. The walls were covered in old posters, their colors faded, the images barely visible. In the center of the room was a pile of objects, children's toys, broken jewelry, a stack of Polaroid photos. I picked up one of the photos, my hands trembling. It showed a group of teenagers, smiling for the camera, the mall's atrium visible in the background. On the back, someone had written a date, March 1993. I flipped through the rest of the photos, recognizing some of the faces from the missing persons reports. My stomach twisted. These were the kids who'd disappeared, their last moments captured in grainy snapshots. Sam knelt beside me, examining the pile. Why would someone leave these here? I shook my head, unable to speak. The room felt smaller, the air heavier. I felt the urge to run, to get as far from this place as possible. But I forced myself to stay, to look. There was a notebook at the bottom of the pile, its cover stained and torn. I opened it, scanning the pages. The handwriting was shaky, the words rambling, but one phrase appeared over and over. The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given. I closed the notebook, my hands shaking. The singing had stopped, replaced by a low, rhythmic thumping, the same sound we'd heard on our last visit. It was coming from the walls, from the floor, from everywhere at once. "We need to go," Sam said, his voice urgent. We retraced our steps, moving quickly through the tunnels, the thumping growing louder with every step. As we emerged into the main corridor, the sound stopped abruptly, replaced by silence that we stood in the center of the mall, our breath visible in the cold air. The silence was absolute, deeper than before, as if the building itself were holding its breath. I looked around, searching for the childlike figure, for any sign of movement. But the mall was empty, the shadows still. Sam packed up his camera, his hands shaking. "We got what we came for," he said. "Let's get out of here." We left the mall as the first light of dawn crept over the horizon, the sky painted in shades of pink and gold. The world outside felt brighter, more real, but the sense of unease lingered. As we drove away, I glanced back at the building, its windows reflecting the rising sun. For a moment, I thought I saw a figure standing in the atrium, watching us go. But when I blinked, it was gone. In the days that followed, I tried to make sense of what we'd found. I pored over the photos, the notebook, the recordings. The evidence was there, voices, symbols, objects left behind. But the meaning remained elusive, just out of reach that I started to notice changes in myself. I slept poorly, plagued by dreams of endless corridors and whispering voices. I became jumpy, flinching at sudden noises, avoiding mirrors and dark corners. I felt as if something had followed me home, a shadow clinging to my heels. Sam called me one night, his voice tense. "I've been having dreams," he said. "About the mall, about the kids. I think we brought something back with us." I didn't know what to say. I wanted to reassure him, to tell him it was just stress, just our imaginations. But I couldn't. I felt it too, the sense of being watched, the weight of unseen eyes that we agreed to meet, to talk things through, to figure out what to do next. But as the days passed, Sam stopped answering my calls. His social media went dark, his phone straight to voicemail. I drove by his apartment, but there was no sign of him. I filed a missing persons report, but the police were dismissive. "Adults disappear all the time," they said. "He'll turn up," but I knew better. The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given. The days after Sam's disappearance blurred together, each one marked by a growing sense of dread. I tried to keep myself busy, to focus on work, on errands, on anything that might distract me from the gnawing anxiety that had taken root in my chest. But it was impossible to ignore. Every time my phone buzzed, I hoped it would be Sam, calling to say he was fine, that he just needed some time away. But the silence stretched on, heavy and unbroken. I replayed our last conversation over and over in my mind, searching for some clue, some hint of what he might have been planning. The dreams, he'd said. The feeling that something had followed us home. I wondered if he'd gone back to Crestwood, drawn by the same compulsion that had pulled me in. Or maybe he'd simply vanished, swallowed up by the same darkness that had claimed so many before him, that I started seeing things, shadows moving in the corners of my vision, reflections that didn't quite match my movements. At night, I heard whispers drifting through my apartment, soft and insistent, just beyond the edge of understanding. I told myself it was stress, that my mind was playing tricks on me. But deep down, I knew the truth. The mall had left its mark on me, just as it had on Sam. I became obsessed with the notebook we'd found in the utility room. I read and reread its pages, trying to decipher the rambling entries, the repeated phrases. The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given. The words echoed in my mind, growing more ominous with each repetition. I started to wonder if the mall was more than just a building, if it was something alive, something hungry. That I spent hours researching similar cases, looking for patterns, for connections. I found stories from other cities, other abandoned malls, each one eerily similar. People drawn to these places, compelled to explore, to document, to understand. And then, inevitably, the disappearances, the missing, the lost point. One night, unable to sleep, I listened again to the audio recordings from our last visit. The child's voice was clearer this time, the lullaby more distinct. I played it on a loop, trying to make out the words. After hours of listening, I finally caught a phrase, "Come find me." The voice was pleading, desperate. I felt a chill run down my spine. I knew what I had to do. I packed a bag with supplies, flashlights, batteries, a first aid kit, water, and the notebook. I left a note for my family, just in case. I didn't tell them where I was going. I couldn't. How could I explain that I was returning to an abandoned mall to search for a friend who might already be lost? The drive to Crestwood was surreal, the city passing by in a blur of lights and shadows. I arrived just before midnight, parking in the same spot as before. The mall loomed ahead, its silhouette stark against the night sky. I hesitated at the entrance, my heart pounding, every instinct screaming at me to turn back. But I forced myself forward, driven by a sense of inevitability. Inside, the air was colder than ever, the silence absolute. My footsteps echoed in the darkness, each one a reminder of how alone I was. I moved quickly, retracing the path Sam and I had taken on our last visit. The food court, the arcade, the candlelit room. Everything was as we'd left it, though the sense of being watched was stronger than ever. I made my way to the utility room, the notebook clutched tightly in my hand. The pile of objects was still there, undisturbed. I knelt beside it, searching for any sign of Sam. There was nothing, no new photos, no notes, no evidence that he'd been here. I opened the notebook, flipping to the last page. There, in shaky handwriting, was a new entry. He's here. I can hear him. The mall keeps what it's given. My breath caught in my throat. The handwriting wasn't mine. It wasn't Sam's, either. It was unfamiliar, jagged, as if written in a hurry. I stood, my flashlight sweeping over the walls. The symbols seemed to pulse in the beam, shifting and twisting. I felt a wave of dizziness, the room spinning around me. I closed my eyes, taking a deep breath, trying to steady myself. When I opened them again, I saw a figure standing in the doorway, a child, or the shadow of one, watching me with empty eyes. I froze, unable to move, my heart hammering in my chest. The figure beckoned, its hand curling in a slow, deliberate motion. I felt an overwhelming urge to follow, to step into the darkness. I hesitated, every rational thought screaming at me to run. But the compulsion was too strong that I followed the figure through the maze of corridors, deeper into the mall than I'd ever been. The air grew colder, the silence heavier. The walls closed in around me, the symbols growing more elaborate, more menacing. I lost track of time, of distance, of everything except the figure ahead of me. We reached a door I'd never seen before, its surface covered in symbols. The figure stopped, turning to face me. For a moment, I thought I saw a flicker of recognition in its eyes, a plea for help, or maybe a warning. The door creaked open, revealing a vast, empty space. The air was thick with the scent of decay, the floor littered with debris. In the center of the room stood a circle of candles, their flames flickering in the darkness. At the center of the circle was Sam. He was kneeling, his head bowed, his hands clasped in front of him. His clothes were torn, his face pale and gaunt. He looked up as I entered, his eyes hollow, haunted. "Sam," I whispered, my voice trembling. He didn't respond. Instead, he began to speak, his voice low and monotone. "The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given." I stepped forward, desperate to reach him. But as I crossed the threshold, I felt a force pushing me back, a wall of cold air that pressed against my chest. I struggled, fighting to move forward, but it was like wading through molasses. The childlike figure stepped into the circle, its form flickering in the candlelight. It knelt beside Sam, placing a hand on his shoulder. Sam shuddered, his eyes filling with tears. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "I tried to leave. I tried to forget, but it won't let me go." I reached out, my fingers brushing the edge of the circle. The air crackled with energy, the candles flaring brighter. I felt a surge of pain, as if my skin were burning. "Sam, you have to fight it," I pleaded. "You have to come with me." He shook his head, his expression one of utter despair. "It's too late. I'm part of it now. We all are." The childlike figure turned to me, its eyes empty, its mouth opening in a silent scream. The room filled with whispers, voices overlapping, pleading, accusing, begging to be remembered. I stumbled back, the force pushing me out of the room. The door slammed shut behind me, the sound echoing through the empty halls. I collapsed to the floor, gasping for breath, my body shaking. The whispers faded, replaced by the familiar silence of the mall. That I don't know how long I lay there, staring at the ceiling, my mind racing. Eventually, I forced myself to stand, to retrace my steps through the maze of corridors. The mall seemed different now, darker, more labyrinthine. I felt as if I were being watched, herded, guided toward the exit. When I finally emerged into the main corridor, the first light of dawn was filtering through the broken windows. The world outside felt distant, unreal, as if I'd crossed some invisible boundary. I stumbled out of the mall, collapsing on the pavement, my breath coming in ragged gasps. I looked back at the building, its windows reflecting the rising sun. For a moment, I thought I saw Sam standing in the atrium, watching me go. But when I blinked, he was gone. I drove home in a daze, my mind numb, my body aching. I tried to convince myself that it had all been a dream, a hallucination brought on by stress and exhaustion. But the pain in my skin, the memory of the whispers, the image of Sam's hollow eyes, they were all too real. In the days that followed, I tried to move on. I went through the motions of daily life, pretending that everything was normal. But the sense of unease lingered, a constant reminder of what I'd seen, of what I'd lost. That I started having dreams again, dreams of endless corridors, of voices calling my name, of Sam kneeling in the circle of candles, his eyes pleading for help. I woke each morning with a sense of dread, certain that the mall was still watching, still waiting. That I avoided mirrors, afraid of what I might see. I kept the lights on at night, the shadows at bay. But no matter what I did, I couldn't escape the feeling that something had followed me home, a shadow clinging to my heels. One night, as I lay in bed, I heard a familiar voice whispering in the darkness. "The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given." I closed my eyes, willing the voice to go away. But it only grew louder, more insistent. I knew then that I would never be free. The mall had claimed me, just as it had claimed Sam, just as it had claimed so many before us. And somewhere, deep in the darkness, the mall waited, hungry and patient, ready to claim the next soul foolish enough to enter its halls. I wish I could say that time dulled the memories, that the world outside eventually reclaimed me, washing away the stains left by Crestwood Galleria. But the truth is, the mall's shadow followed me everywhere. It lingered in the quiet moments, in the hush before sleep, in the flicker of a streetlight at midnight. I saw it in the faces of strangers, in the empty windows of shuttered shops, in the way my own reflection sometimes seemed to hesitate, as if it belonged to someone else, that I tried to talk to people about what had happened, to explain the weight I carried. But the words always sounded hollow, absurd. How do you tell someone that a place can haunt you, that a building can remember, can hunger, can keep what it's given? How do you explain the loss of a friend to something that doesn't have a name, that can't be seen or touched, only felt in the marrow of your bones? I went back to work, to the routines that had once given my life structure. I answered emails, attended meetings, smiled when I was supposed to. But I was always waiting for a voice in the dark, for a shadow at the edge of my vision, for the moment when the world would tilt and I'd find myself back in those endless corridors. The dreams grew worse. Some nights, I'd wake up gasping, convinced I was still inside the mall, the walls closing in, the whispers growing louder. Other nights, I'd dream of Sam, his eyes hollow, his voice echoing with that same terrible refrain. The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given. I'd wake with tears on my face, the sheets twisted around me like restraints, that I started to notice changes in myself. I became more withdrawn, more suspicious. I avoided crowds, flinched at sudden noises, kept my back to the wall in every room. I stopped answering calls from friends and family, unable to bear their concern, their confusion. I knew they couldn't help me. No one could. One evening, as I sat alone in my apartment, I heard a knock at the door. My heart leapt into my throat. I hadn't been expecting anyone. I hesitated, every instinct screaming at me to stay put, to pretend I wasn't home. But the knock came again, louder this time, more insistent. I forced myself to stand, to cross the room. I peered through the peephole, half expecting to see nothing at all. Instead, I saw a woman standing in the hallway, her face pale, her eyes wide with fear. She looked familiar, though I couldn't place her at first. I opened the door a crack. "Can I help you?" She glanced over her shoulder, as if afraid of being watched. Are you the one who posted about Crestwood Galleria?" I nodded, my mouth suddenly dry. "Yes. What?" She stepped inside, closing the door behind her. "My name is Lisa. My brother disappeared at Crestwood years ago. I saw your posts online. I thought maybe you could help me understand what happened." I stared at her, unsure what to say. I wanted to tell her to leave, to run as far and as fast as she could. But I saw the desperation in her eyes, the same desperation I'd felt when I realized Sam was gone, that we sat at my kitchen table, the silence between us heavy. She told me about her brother, Mark, how he'd been fascinated by abandoned places, how he'd spent hours researching Crestwood, how he'd vanished without a trace one night after telling her he was going to explore the mall. The police had found his car in the parking lot, but no sign of him inside. The case had gone cold, like so many others. "I just want to know what happened," she said, her voice trembling. "I just want to know if he's still out there, somewhere." I wanted to comfort her, to offer hope. But all I could do was tell her the truth as I understood it. I told her about the symbols, the voices, the feeling of being watched. I told her about Sam, about the circle of candles, about the notebook and its ominous refrain. I told her that some places remember, that some places keep what they're given. She listened in silence, her hands clenched tightly in her lap. When I finished, she wiped her eyes and nodded. "Thank you," she whispered. "At least now I know I'm not alone." After she left, I sat in the darkness, the weight of her grief settling over me like a shroud. I realized then that I wasn't the only one haunted by Crestwood, that the mall's shadow stretched farther than I'd ever imagined. There were others, families, friends, loved ones, left behind, searching for answers, for closure, for something to fill the void left by those who'd vanished. I started to receive more messages, more knocks at the door. People who'd lost someone at Crestwood, people who'd had strange experiences there, people who just wanted to understand. I listened to their stories, shared my own, tried to offer what little comfort I could. But the truth was, I had no answers. Only more questions. One night, as I was sorting through the messages, I found a package on my doorstep. There was no return address, no note, just a small, battered box wrapped in brown paper. Inside, I found a Polaroid photo, yellowed with age. It showed a group of teenagers standing in the mall's atrium, their faces blurred, their smiles frozen in time. On the back, someone had written, "We're still here." I stared at the photo for a long time, my hands shaking. I wondered who had sent it, what they wanted me to know. I wondered if the people in the photo were still alive, still trapped somewhere inside the mall, their lives suspended in that endless, echoing silence. I started to see the mall everywhere, in dreams, in reflections, in the spaces between words. I saw it in the way the city's lights flickered at night, in the way the wind howled through empty streets, in the way my own shadow seemed to stretch and twist, reaching for something just out of sight. That I realized then that Crestwood wasn't just a place. It was a wound, a scar on the landscape, a reminder of everything we'd lost and everything we were still searching for. It was a story that refused to end, a hunger that could never be satisfied. I thought about going back, about trying one last time to find Sam, to find Mark, to find all the others who'd vanished. But I knew, deep down, that the mall would never let them go, that it would never let me go either. Instead, I started to write. I wrote down everything I could remember, the sights, the sounds, the feelings. I wrote about the silence, about the whispers, about the way the mall seemed to breathe, to watch, to wait. I wrote about the people I'd met, the stories I'd heard, the grief that bound us all together. That I wrote because I needed to remember, because I needed to believe that our stories mattered, that they could reach beyond the walls of that cursed place. I wrote because I hoped, in some small way, that my words might help someone else, might keep them from making the same mistakes, from falling into the same traps. But even as I wrote, I knew the truth. The mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given. And somewhere, in the darkness, it waits. Sometimes, late at night, I hear footsteps in the hallway outside my apartment. Sometimes I hear a child's voice, singing a lullaby just beyond the edge of hearing. Sometimes I wake to find a Polaroid photo on my nightstand, a new group of faces staring back at me, their eyes wide with fear. I don't know what the future holds. I don't know if I'll ever be free of Crestwood's shadow. But I do know this: the stories we tell matter. The memories we keep matter. And sometimes, the only way to fight the darkness is to shine a light, however small, however fragile. So if you're listening to this, if you're thinking about exploring an abandoned place, if you're drawn to the silence, to the mystery, to the promise of something hidden, remember this: some places are empty for a reason. Some doors are better left closed. Some stories are better left unfinished. But if you do go, if you find yourself standing at the threshold, staring into the darkness, remember what I've told you. Remember the voices, the symbols, the feeling of being watched. Remember that the mall remembers. The mall keeps what it's given. And if you hear a voice calling your name, if you see a shadow moving just out of sight, if you feel the weight of unseen eyes watching from the darkness, run. Run, and don't look back, because some places never let go. It's been months since I last set foot near Crestwood Galleria, but the mall's presence lingers, woven into the fabric of my life in ways I never could have anticipated. I see it in the way I hesitate before entering a darkened room, in the way I flinch at the echo of footsteps behind me, in the way I scan every crowd for a familiar, hollow-eyed face. The world has moved on, as it always does, but for those of us who have been touched by that place, time moves differently. It loops and doubles back, trapping us in memories that refuse to fade. I've tried to rebuild, to find meaning in the aftermath. I've reconnected with family, reached out to old friends, tried to fill the silence with laughter and conversation. But there are moments, quiet, in-between moments, when the weight of what happened presses down on me, and I find myself drifting back to those endless, echoing corridors. Sometimes I wonder if I ever really left. Lisa and I have kept in touch. We meet for coffee every few weeks, sharing stories, piecing together fragments of the past. She's become a kind of anchor for me, a reminder that I'm not alone in this. We talk about Mark, about Sam, about all the others who vanished into the mall's hungry silence. We talk about the future, about hope, about the possibility of healing. But there's always an unspoken understanding between us, a knowledge that some wounds never fully close. One evening, as we sat in a quiet cafe, Lisa slid a small envelope across the table. "I found this in Mark's things," she said softly. "I thought you should see it." Inside was a faded map of Crestwood Galleria, hand-drawn and annotated in Mark's careful script. Certain areas were circled, others crossed out. In the margin, he'd written a single sentence. "The heart of the mall is not a place, but a memory." I stared at the map, my mind racing. I thought about all the times I'd wandered those halls, searching for answers, for closure, for something to fill the emptiness left by loss. I realized then that the mall's true power wasn't in its walls or its shadows, but in the memories it held, the memories of those who'd passed through, who'd left a piece of themselves behind. That night, I dreamed of Crestwood again. But this time, the dream was different. I walked the corridors, but they were filled with light, with laughter, with the echoes of lives once lived. I saw Sam, smiling, waving from the arcade. I saw Mark, sitting with friends in the food court, his face alive with joy. I saw myself, younger, unburdened, moving through the world with a sense of wonder I thought I'd lost forever. When I woke, I felt a strange sense of peace. The mall was still there, still waiting, but it no longer felt like a prison. It felt like a memory, a painful one, yes, but also a reminder of everything I'd survived, everything I'd learned that I started to write again, not just about Crestwood, but about other places, other stories. I wrote about hope, about resilience, about the ways we find light in the darkness. I wrote for myself, for Lisa, for Sam and Mark and all the others who'd been lost. I wrote because I needed to believe that our stories could matter, that they could reach beyond the walls of any haunted place. Sometimes I still hear the whispers. Sometimes I still see shadows moving just out of sight. But I'm no longer afraid. I know now that the mall's power lies not in its ability to keep, but in our willingness to remember, to bear witness, to refuse to let the silence win. That if you're listening to this, if you've ever felt the pull of an abandoned place, if you've ever stood at the edge of the unknown and wondered what waits in the darkness, know that you're not alone. We are all haunted in one way or another by the places we've been, by the memories we carry. But we are also more than our fears, more than our losses. The chilling reality of abandoned mall exploration isn't just about ghosts or shadows or the things that go bump in the night. It's about the stories we leave behind, the echoes that linger long after we're gone. It's about the courage to face the darkness, to ask questions, to seek answers even when they terrify us. It's about the hope that, in sharing our stories, we might help someone else find their way out of the maze. So if you ever find yourself drawn to a place like Crestwood, remember this: the silence is not empty. It is filled with memories, with longing, with the voices of those who came before. Listen to them, learn from them, and when the time comes, add your own story to the chorus. Because in the end, that's all any of us can do: remember and be remembered. And as for me, I'll keep writing, keep searching, keep shining my small light into the darkness. Because somewhere, out there, someone is listening. Someone is waiting for a story that will help them understand, help them heal, help them find their way home. And maybe, just maybe, that's enough.